Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. I really don't like making and then having to edit really stressful, very serious videos, so I don't know how serious this is gonna be because honestly it just takes such a toll watching myself back be all stressed or so serious or sad or angry. I don't like it. But this is a video that I felt I definitely had to make. Today I am decked out in my grandma's stuff. So this is actually an old Christmas sweater that she used to wear like all the time, and I have inherited it. Also I'm wearing a few of the rings that I took from her house. Thought that would be helpful. So my grandma died of coronavirus, and that's what I want to talk to y'all about today. So you might already know my grandmother, Brenda. You might have seen the documentary I made about her.
It's one person told me one time, I can't believe a crazy old woman like you can do all that stuff you can still do. And I said, well, you know what? I am a little bit crazy. You have to be a little bit crazy to live your life.
Or you might remember her from her cameos in a couple of my 48-hour short films.
And they came at me like they were trying to get money.
Oh, really?
She actually won Best Supporting Actress for her appearance in Soup. If you guys haven't seen those and you want to watch them, I'll link them down below so you can check them out. So as a kid, I loved my grandmother. Like, I've always loved her, but as a kid, I liked her more. Like, she was my grandma. Me and my brother grew up where my parents would have a date night once a week, and we would go over to our grandparents' house and hang out with them and eat a lot of junk food and drink a lot of soda and just hang out. So the sight of her was always a pleasant one. Being at her house was a positive memory. My grandmother was a difficult person. If you watch the documentary I made about my grandmother called Brenda, you might find yourself feeling like she was this flawless person that I was so lucky to have as a grandmother. It must be so fun to have her as my grandmother. But the thing with that documentary was that I really let her tell her own story from her own perspective. So that documentary is really how she sees herself, and that's not to say that it's not true, because it is. But there's a lot missing from that documentary. My grandmother was a complicated person. She was someone who was hurt a lot and never really recovered from that, and that really skewed her perception of the world. I remember when I was about 15 or 16 and I got my driving permit that my grandma started picking me up from school so I could practice driving. I ended up having this huge fight with her, which ultimately resulted in my parents sitting me down and telling me that, hey, you're not the only one who has a hard time getting along with grandma. You just need to employ the tactic of basically just smiling and nodding. And that was really hard for me to accept. I like to be able to talk things out with people. You assume that people are generally quite rational, but that's not how my grandmother operated. We're talking about somebody who told me that she had never lied in her entire life. It's also a woman who wouldn't hesitate to give me any of her internal organs if I needed a transplant. That woman would give any family member a kidney, no questions asked. Okay, we're gonna perk up because this was not meant to be a sad video. When the pandemic started, my grandmother was really difficult and stubborn about not wearing a mask. She refused to do it, said she couldn't breathe while wearing a mask. We tried to get her to wear a mask, and it never worked. She came over to our house frequently because every other day we have to give our cat IV fluid because our cat is super old. My grandma used to be a nurse, so she was very adamant that like she wanted to do it to help us out. So we're like, okay, fine. And we kind of suggested that, hey, if you're not going to be careful in the pandemic, maybe you should stop coming over to do the cat. And that didn't go over so well. So we're like, fine, keep coming over to do the cat. Which made us really nervous because my mom has asthma and we're not sure if she got coronavirus, if she could die. But she kept coming over and nobody got sick. We'd been social distancing since March and it was now fall and she still hadn't gotten the coronavirus. So it seemed like, you know, if she's not gotten it yet, she's not going to get it now. So Thanksgiving comes around. And of course Thanksgiving is different because, you know, we're in a pandemic, so we're not trying to have huge family get-togethers. People aren't coming in from out of town, at least not in my family. We still were going to have a small dinner with my grandmother because she was alone and we didn't want her to be alone on Thanksgiving. I can't remember if it was the same day or a day or two before we were supposed to have the dinner, but around the time that we were supposed to have the dinner with my grandmother, she comes over and she's freaking out. She thinks that somebody's been stalking her. She's just really freaked out. So my mom and dad talked to her and they're like, okay, don't worry, just like go home, cool off, like everything's gonna be okay. And she leaves our house, and then we didn't hear from her for a few hours. My mom tried calling her. She told her when she left, like, hey, call us so we know that you're okay and you got home all right. And we didn't hear anything from her. Finally, now in the evening time, my mom calls her and she finally answers her cell phone, and turns out that she had parked somewhere near this area that she went to often, near one of the clubs that you'll see in the documentary if you watch that she goes to often. That's where she had parked outside of. And she couldn't find her way home. So that was really scary, and my parents went and picked her up, found that there was a tank of gasoline in the backseat of her car for we don't know how long. Something that can happen when you're inhaling fumes for that long is you can get confused. So we think that's what happened to her, which just was like, is this something bigger? Is this just like a one-time thing? Like, why did she leave this in her car for so long? Is she not taking care of herself? But my parents got her home. Then in the days following, we needed to get the cat more IV fluid. So we ended up taking the cat over to my grandma's house to do it there, since she was not in a state where she could be driving. So we get there, and my grandma seems kind of disheveled, you know. She's like a little confused, but she did the cat's IV somehow. It was weird, and I was really worried about the cat being safe with grandma having a needle near her and being confused, and it was kind of scary. And I don't want to get into all the details of what happened over there, but we realized that she was really, really not okay. We got the cat's IV fluid done and went home. In the days following, it was pretty impossible to get my grandmother to pick up her phone, and my parents eventually went over to her house to check on her, and it became very apparent that she was sick, like really sick. And for whatever reason, she kept turning off her phone. My mom really worried about her and kept pressuring her to go to the hospital, and my grandmother fought with her tooth and nail, did not want any kind of special attention, didn't want to be looked at or checked out, but my mom insisted and eventually called for an ambulance, and then fought again with my grandmother until she finally allowed for EMS to check her out and assess her. And they told us that she most likely has coronavirus, but unless she comes to the hospital, they can't confirm it. So my grandmother would not go to a hospital. She would not even put on a mask, even just to be checked out by EMS. I don't think she did. My grandmother was a stubborn person. It's weird talking about her in past tense. And EMS couldn't just take her without it being kidnapping. I mean, she was a full-grown adult, and without her consent, they can't just take her to the hospital. So eventually, after a lot of fighting and probably tears, my mom just had to accept that my grandmother was not going to go to a hospital. She was just going to stay in bed, and we didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't there, but my mom told me that grandma kept saying, God, please forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Just trying to get right with God, and that's how I knew that she was preparing to die. Honestly, really fucking spooky. And of course, it was super hard to reach my grandmother on the phone because, like I said, she kept turning off her phone. So once a day, every day following that, my parents went over with face mask, gloves, and a face shield to go and check on my grandmother, who we weren't sure whether or not she had coronavirus, but possibly did. But they couldn't hang out with her because obviously we're not trying to get it. They'd come, check on her, spend a little time there, and then they'd have to go home. And then one night they went over and she just wasn't alive anymore. All in all, she visibly had coronavirus for about 5 days before she died. And you know, you could say maybe she was a little out of her mind to not want to go to the hospital, but that wasn't really the case because knowing my grandmother, she'd always said she never wanted any kind of fuss to be made about her if she became any sort of burden or if she became sick with anything or got dementia and didn't know us. She always said if she doesn't know who we are anymore, to just put her in a home. She had no business being around us. Or if she died, you could just throw her body in a ditch, which we obviously didn't do. So not wanting to go to a hospital was pretty consistent with how she'd always been. And this was in early December, and I remember I was watching The Happiest Season. I was so excited to watch my gay Christmas movie. And in the middle of it, my dad called and told me that Grandma had died and that I should go ahead and tell my brother because they wouldn't be back for a little while. I'm feeling really overwhelmed and uncomfortable right now. Oh shit. This wasn't supposed to be emotional. Emotions? Hacha! Hiya! 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 Following her death, it always felt like, you know, when someone dies, you're supposed to be devastated and you're supposed to be so sad. And I didn't really feel that because you know, as a kid, I was so close with my grandmother, and then as I got older, I just realized how difficult of a person she was to be around. It got to the point where you couldn't talk to her, and she would intentionally try to start things just to get in an argument with you, and somehow, I don't know what she was trying to accomplish. She would never admit that she was wrong about anything. So I just got to the point where I didn't talk to her. When she came over, even if I helped her with the cat and the IV fluid, I would intentionally not make eye contact with her. That's how serious it was. And it's not like I hated her, like I love my grandmother, but, you know, you can be physically close, like you see her all the time, and still not be emotionally close. I'd also add that following each of my breakups, she said really comforting things, surprisingly out of nowhere. I mean, the woman had been through some horrible relationships. She also used to make really good food from stuff she would grow in her own garden. She didn't like buying canned stuff. Well, I think she kind of got over that. She was over it when she got older, though. But Grandma's house was a place of good food. So it was just really uncomfortable people after she died, just constantly being like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you sure you're okay? Are you sure there's nothing I can do for you? And it's like, I feel like such a jerk because I wasn't more devastated than I was. And it's strange because as more time has passed, she died in early December, and it's now January 25th when I'm filming this video. It's like the more time passes, the more I revert to seeing her the way that I used to see her when I was a kid. When I was really happy to see her, and when I was really happy to be over at her house. And it was like a good time. Look at my dermatitis. Can you see it? Definitely can't see it, but it's okay. It's like now I think of her more as a happy image than a sight for dread or discomfort. And both are true images of her. I didn't make this video to be sad. What the fuck? This is a really great sweater though. Obviously, this might not be something everybody thinks about, but you can't have a funeral during a pandemic. Can't have a large gathering, even when people die. And that's the thing. We couldn't really hang out with her while she was dying because we didn't want to get coronavirus. If she had gone to a hospital, we would have been able to see her even less. So regardless of whether she stayed at home or she went to a hospital, she still had to die alone because of that's the nature of coronavirus. Coronavirus is something that really isolates people, whether you have the sickness or not. I mean, especially if you have it, it makes you really alone. And this isn't meant to scare people. If you're already doing what you can and you're already afraid of the coronavirus and taking the precautions that you need to, then that's great. But for the people that aren't wearing masks and don't take it seriously, think it's a hoax, it really fucking sucks. It sucks to get it. And it sucks to have to be the family member of somebody who died from it. So I just got off work and I'm really pissed off because knowing that she probably died from coronavirus and she didn't do anything to protect herself, she didn't wear a mask, she wasn't that careful, she didn't sanitize often, she just went about her life like normal. People doing this think that they're just making an individual choice. Like, if I don't wear a mask, it's my problem. Like, it doesn't affect you. Yes, it does. Like, I just saw somebody come through my register without a mask, this old lady, and I just thought of my grandma and I got so mad because it's like, my mom not only lost her mom, but now she has to deal with the fact that she died alone. Because my mom can't hang out with her. My mom has asthma. She can't get coronavirus. So she came over there, took care of the house, and then she just had to leave. If you choose not to wear a mask, you're not just doing it to yourself. You're hurting other people. Like, my grandma died alone. She died by herself. And now my mom has to deal with that. And there's nothing my mom could have done, you know? Wear a fucking mask! I'm really tired of hearing these stories about people who said how it was such a hoax and they were so against it, especially like church leaders and things, and then they get it and they're in the hospital and they have this like video they made from their bed being like, guys, it's real, I'm so sorry I ever said it was a hoax, please take it seriously. Like, just take it seriously from the beginning before you have to get coronavirus. A week after Grandma died, my grandfather, who is divorced from her a long time ago, died from terminal cancer. And I talked about that in my year in review video a little bit. And I didn't really fully break down until Jessie Nelson announced that she was leaving Little Mix. I'm assuming that's why I had the reaction that I did. I don't know. We had known for like over a year that he was gonna die from cancer, so it gave us time to prepare, but it's still hard to... It's hard. And my mom lost both of her parents in the span of a week. It feels like something that we should be done dealing with now, but it comes in like a new wave. Every now and then it's like a new little thing hits you. Like going to my grandmother's house to pick out stuff that I wanted to keep recently. That was the first time that I'd been back to her house since I talked about I did the cat with her. And being back was just strange. It was so bizarre. Thinking about the fact that I had always imagined that one day when I got married that my grandmother would be at my wedding, and that's not gonna happen. I have 2 living grandparents right now. 2 left. I guess initially I had 6, if that helps for reference. It's weird. I didn't expect this to happen. It's one of those things, like me and my brother both agreed about this, that we thought it just seemed like she was never gonna die, just out of sheer stubbornness. And then just like that, she's gone. There was a lot of stuff that felt wrong, that felt off about her being gone, but one of the things I realized later was that when people get sick with the coronavirus, they see how terrible it is and they instantly regret and they want to apologize and be like, wow, I should have worn a mask. And that never happened for her. It kind of feels like she was okay with dying from coronavirus, and so she made that choice for herself, but also for other people that she could have potentially exposed as well. And she never would have intentionally done that. She definitely lived in denial about, you know, the effectiveness of masks and just the coronavirus in general, I'm sure. The whole thing just feels odd. More recently, it's just been hitting me that I don't, you know, I have other grandparents, but I don't have a grandma anymore. I do still have a grandmother and a grandfather, but grandma is gone. Aww. I didn't want to cry. Her hair is still on this, which kind of makes me wonder if she washed this. Please stay safe and wear a mask. And if you want to know more about my grandmother, please check out the documentary Brenda. It's going to be linked down below. And the 2 cameos that she made in my short films. I really appreciate you all, and thanks for sticking with me and watching this video, even if it was a little bit sad. And I'll see you all next time. Love you. Bye.